Okay, good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the Sustainability and Transport Review and Committee. Item 1 on the agenda is notice of recording. Reminder to all members and officers that this meeting being live streamed on the internet and subsequent broadcast. So please keep this in mind when speaking. Press and public can record and take photos if they wish, except whether item agenda. I'm doing apologies. Are there any apologies? So we haven't had any apologies, and move on to.
No, Declan is on. He is in the building. He's just.
Okay.
Sorry.
Declaration of interest. Can I draw members' attention to the amended description as detailed on the agenda for declaring interest? As always, members are advised to declare any relevant interests now or before any relevant item. Item 4 is excellent notes of the last meeting and action tracker. Can members agree the excellent notes of the last meeting?
Sure. Chair, I wasn't at the last meeting, but just looking at the first action note relating to the waste disposal procurement contract. Obviously, the action note refers to our commitment as a council to net zero strategy. I was a little bit concerned that in terms of the update, it says scrutiny officers liaising with officers and will advise in due course. I mean, the time scale in terms of our commitments to zero carbon are pretty intense, actually. And I would have liked to have seen perhaps something more specific in terms of when those issues are going to be updated for this committee. And in general terms, I would have thought that it would be desirable to have some timescales in terms of when we can expect updates. I know that things slip and they're not always down to the it's not necessarily issues relating to this committee that hold things up, but I think it seems to me it would be a good plan to do that. I don't know whether that's acceptable or not. The other thing was that I wasn't at the meeting. I've seen the minutes of the last meeting, but I don't see on the agenda where those minutes are approved. And also that seemed a bit odd to me.
The meeting previously are all approved here. So I mean that's the yeah. So we are.
No, but what I'm saying is normally on a committee agenda is an item for the minutes to be approved, but I don't see one here.
Mr. Chair, on that point, absolutely. Under item 4 and the action notes, that if they were agreed in the last meeting, that should have been set out. So, which says action notes 4, there should be a note there to reflect the fact that the minutes were agreed. On the other point, so that can be amended. So if that was agreed, so I agree with that, but subject to the committee agreeing that they were agreed, we can put that in to reflect that. The other point that's made, obviously, the action note, the purpose of this item is to agree the accuracy of the minutes from the action notes from the last meeting. So I hear the points that you make, Councillor, about the date and everything not being there. Ultimately, it's for this committee to agree whether the action notes are a true reflection of what was agreed at that meeting. So it's not to change what was agreed at the last meeting, it's to approve the accuracy of the notes from the previous meeting.
So I'm not disagreeing with that, but is it not normal to have an agenda item for the minutes to be agreed as a correct remedy?
Okay, point taken, Brooks. I think that's normal on any agenda. I'm sorry, I think we are making it, but it should be on the agenda item, but minutes of the last meeting. Yeah. Yeah, it's a minutes as well. Okay, so it's evolved. Okay, so the action notes also also have say the minutes of our meeting. Okay, so we remember the minutes and minutes is not. Okay, right. Anything else on the action track? Yes.
Well, is there any update since the update on the action tracker about arranging a private member briefing on the waste disposal contract?
Yes, it'll be taken under the work programme.
Yeah, that. So, from what from my notes, yes, we'll be picking some of these up later part of the work program. Okay. And now we move on to item 5.1, and that Dom has been worried from the VHA, and so he would like us to switch over the item 5 agenda with item 6. So could we take the re-procurement of the highway PFI contract first? Okay, right, over to you.
Yeah, it's just. I'll lead off very briefly and not try and steal any of Dom's thunder. Dom will do the main part.
Yeah, and
sorry, Jack.
okay, I think for the benefit of people who are watching the live stream of the and also the and will watch the live stream subsequently, that we need to introduce yourself as your role and
No problem at all. Yeah, so for everybody's benefit, I'm Kevin Nixon, Assistant Director of Highways and Infrastructure, so responsible for everything within highways, including things like service management, the PFI contract, the next item we'll have on street works, permitting, traffic management, parking services. So yeah, so effectively everything that's on your work programme at the moment for the rest of the municipal year. So that's we've seen a lot of it probably, but the subject for today, highway maintenance and management PFI contract, is a very brief history, and I think we did some of this at the informal session back in June, but very brief history of that before I let Don sort of update on where we are on re-procurement of the time in 2010's PFI contract, with the idea that it would be a 25-year maintenance and management delivery by as a service provider. Run into some issues with that. With Amy delivery 2-3 years into the project, and by 2019 we were looking at effectively Amy exiting the project on the basis they couldn't deliver the requirements after a couple of difficult court cases. But we moved on with that. Amy exited, paid the council a settlement to leave the contract, and since then, since 2020, when we got into a services contractor in the shape of Kier, as you all know them, we've been going through a process of re-procuring this as a PFI. So at the moment it's being delivered as what we call a cost plus, a pay-as-you-go type contract. But we are looking to put this back on a PFI footing where the risk is passed over to the service provider as part of the transfer of risk as a traditional PFI would be. So Don will talk through where we've got to on that, what it means in terms of timescales for re-procurement. But the idea is that we're very focused on delivering a re-procured PFI within the amount of money that's still available within the project, which is a constraint that we've got to see us through to 2035. That's the key focus of the work. I think it's worth pointing out as well, we did take a cabinet report last Tuesday, which gave a fairly significant and detailed update on where we are and all those things. But Don will run through some pack of slides now that we also largely run through with members as well last Tuesday. But that should give you sort of better feel for where we are and where we're going. Don't want to steal any more of your slide content.
Thank you. So I'm Dominic DeBeckley, I'm the PFI contract manager. I work for Kevin. I'm just going to run through a few background slides. Apologies, some of these are duplicated from the private briefing given to members, but hopefully just a useful refresher, and then we'll go to your questions from there if that's okay. So just in terms of the council's highway maintenance and management PFI project, the term PFI is used, that's just a financing mechanism for our highway maintenance and management service. And it's the means through which we deliver our statutory obligations to keep the highway basically safe and available for use, which comes under those pieces of legislation highlighted on the slide. It can broadly be described as a back of footway to back of footway service, managing all the council's infrastructure assets in between. So not everything on the highway belongs to the council, but a good portion of it does. So that includes roads, footways, lighting, as you'd expect, also things like traffic signals, structures, highway drainage, so just the top part, sewers underneath, road markings, street furniture, things like that. So that's what it's there to maintain, and as I said, to discharge our statutory obligations that we have. In terms of the structure of how we deliver that as a project, the core part of it is a relationship between three parties. So the City Council has a contract with a company called Birmingham Highways Limited. Contracts also referred to sometimes as the project agreement. And Birmingham Highways Limited is a company that has borrowed money from a consortium of banks referred to as the senior lenders. And as anyone else would if they had a lending arrangement with the bank, there is a lending facilities agreement between Birmingham Highways Limited and its lenders. The other part of that relationship is what's called the fund to direct agreement, which is essentially it's a fallback position between the council and the senior lenders to make sure that the debt is covered. But then in terms of how that is, first of all, financed, basically half of the money that we have to finance that project comes from a £50 million a year grant from the Department for Transport. And that's put together with the council's own revenue budget, which is probably just over £50 million a year at the moment, for the duration of the project. And those two things come together, and that forms the overall funding envelope that Kevin referred to earlier. Just in the background, that senior lending group, there's actually 11 banks in there in total. It's 10 lending banks plus an agent that manages it, which is quite a large and diverse group of banks. They've all got very different interests. Some of them are UK banks, some of them are European banks, some of them are lending into UK infrastructure markets, some of them are no longer doing that. So quite a lot of dynamics in that group. But the bit you're probably more interested in is the actual delivery of this. So the part in the bottom right, in the main, it's delivered through the subcontractors. So BHL doesn't actually deliver the works itself, it subcontracts it. And at the moment, the principal contractor that they do that to is Kier Highways, with some of the surfacing works being delivered by Tarmac. The other things that are there are basically corporate arrangements around Birmingham Highways Limited and how its shareholders manage Birmingham Highways Limited. So I won't go into too much detail on that unless you need to. Just going on to the interim period. So at the moment we still have a PFI contract, and we've been quite keen to ensure that the PFI contract remains intact, because if it ends, then our PFI grant will end. Now, during this interim period, as Kevin said, we're delivering the services through a cost plus arrangement. And the reason for that was that after we reached the settlements in 2019, it was important that we replaced Amey as BHL's subcontractor. And that happened in April 2020, with Kier Highways taking over at that point. Kier is delivering critical operational services to ensure that the council's network is maintained, and as I said, maintained as safe and available to use. But they're also delivering some of the capital investment works, and through this period, we're delivering £140 million of capital investment, predominantly in carriageways. Also an element in footways, but there's also some in there, street lighting and on structures as well. During this interim period, as well as the priority of getting that investment going again, our other priority is to work with Birmingham Highways Limited to restructure the contract for the long term so that we can take it out to 2035 and complete the delivery of the works that we set out to do. And that's being done in conjunction with BHL because it's their procurement of their subcontractor that we're working with them upon. But they will do that predominantly through a single principal contractor to do the work. Just very briefly about that £148 million investment. These are the figures of the left-hand column is the amounts that have been approved by Cabinet, and the right-hand column in the centre is the amount that have been completed up until the end of September. So actual works on the ground is slightly more than these amounts. Traffic signals and tunnels, we always knew there would be a slight delay in starting that because of the investigation of the programme and the development of that programme, and also designing the works on site. So those works, particularly traffic signals, will be starting shortly, and the tunnels programme is due to start in 2023. So overall, a very positive picture in terms of delivering the investment. Over £100 million already delivered, and a significant amount to come during 2023 as well. And just in terms of the procurement programme, apologies that the text is a little bit small, but hopefully you can see it on the copies of the slides that you've got. The dotted line is where we are at the moment. We've just submitted an outline business case at the end of September to government, which is the business case to continue the PFI funding for the duration through to 2035. And we've already started a process with DHL of commercial dialogue with 2 qualified bidders. That's actually progressing as we speak. There are dialogue sessions going on at the moment, and we're going to go through a couple more iterations of the dialogue before we get to a point in the early spring of next year where we will get bid submissions back from the bidders. And from there, it's a question of evaluating those bid submissions and submitting a full business case to government, and potentially looking at the moment, we think the service commencement date of 1st of November next year, but that is subject to approval by government. So, as I said, just a brief overview, but happy to take questions, Chair.
Right, well, and because we're the one that some information related to be working confidential. So if you wish to discuss it confidential, which can't be because of no meeting, then we can always have a separate meeting. So, questions?
I have a question that may well be confidential, so feel free to say if it is. But it's just about the restructuring the contract with Birmingham Highways Limited. Do you have any idea what that looks like? You mentioned the date, but if there's any other sort of terms of it that were due to change.
The terms are part of they are part of the commercial dialogue that we're having. But I think it's probably fair to say that the council has since the settlement, it's always accepted that changes would happen to the contract, and that's an important part of finding an appropriate balance between what the market commercially will accept to deliver and what we can accept as a contract that we're prepared to enter into, and it represents value for us. Do you want to add anything?
No, it is exactly that, Dom. It's, the third element of that is what we can afford. So yeah, they're the 3 parts of this. It's a set of services that we are content with. But first of all, I'm content with that, as Dom said, keeps the network safe from my personal perspective as the person who's quite still for that. But then a set of services that we're as a council reflect what we want from the citizens of Birmingham. And then as Dom said, the other part of that is what the industry, what the contractors find, they'll find something attractive in that to bid for it. And then the third part of that is what we can afford within the cost envelope that we've got for the rest of the project. So yeah, those 3 things have got to come together. That's all part of the dialogue and bidding process that we're going through.
Okay. Is that okay? We have got the commercial incentives on it. It's in the discuss somewhere else.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Is the customer service side part of the subcontract with Kier? Is that be Equitix, or is that I mean, in terms of actually, who is answering the emails, or how, or that, is that a separate contract, or is that part of all of?
So there's probably don't go in on the details, but there's customer services element within Kia, which probably as councillors you all get at some point a response from somebody at Kia to a query you might have. They are all still dealt with though through the BCC customer services team, so they're logged and registered through the BCC customer services team. So there is, and we are actively doing a piece of work on that at the moment in terms of it goes into what's being procured as a set of services about how we can improve that, make that more efficient, because we're conscious, and we've seen examples of members, you have potentially 2 responses sometimes, and always tie up, and that if there's any duplication and sort of lack of efficiency of effort in that, that's something we're working very much firstly on with Wendy Griffiths and her customer services team to improve that, but then also within what's going out in the reprocured contract, discussions with those bidders again about what if this is we still want things to come through the customer services team at BCC. We still want to take ownership of that as a response to you and the citizens. But we always need that input from the service provider. So the question is, if this is the way we're dealing with it within BCC, again, back to bidders, it is about how do they see the best way of them fitting into that, so that you and citizens see one joined up service and one joined up answer. Is that, and Don, related to that?
No, I was just going to emphasise the point about one answer, and you as a customer should expect to receive one answer from us.
Yeah, because I think that's being kind of part of a lot of the complaints or comments is just about the kind of customer service, and I know it's obviously throughout the council we're looking at, but it is just well, we've got the opportunity, or your opportunity to you're kind of negotiating contractual terms. It is just really setting out, well, actually, what is your customer service point, and ensuring that is actually taken seriously as part of bid, or how it's going to be managed, because I think that's what we want to know.
Yeah, so very much that customer journey, we like to call it, work being done, and there is a separate thread of work. Again, Wendy Griffiths is leading through, I think, coordinating the scrutiny, and we've got a session, I think, with the cost party, so actually coordinating the scrutiny with Wendy over the next few weeks to discuss how it's being taken forward within highways. And as you say, then it's about building that into what we're telling bidders that we want to see as a single joined up efficient customer journey for people's inquiry.
Thank you. Okay.
Sorry, I just wondered if I could ask, when this at the moment, is it like an interim contract, what's the gap between that ending and the new contract starting? Is it seamless moving into one, or is there a delay?
It will be seamless. There is, and as part of the cabinet report that went last week, part of that was about needing to extend that period. So that when we went to cabinet last year, June 21, wasn't
December.
Sorry, December. The timescales for going from the interim services back into a PFI contract again would have been September the 1st next year. What we're saying now, this is after feedback from bidders, the 2 bidders in the process. They've asked for an extension of that in order that they can put in the most effective and efficient bids they can. That would now take us to November the 1st next year instead, and that was the cabinet report last week. So yeah, for effectively but there will, to answer your question, there will be no gap between the end of that interim services provision and the new PFI contract. We will have to take steps now as we are with Birmingham Highways Limited, to extend various mechanics within all those agreements Don just talked about there, and as one thing, but then also obviously extending the interim services contract with Kia for that period. But there will be it will be a seamless handover. It won't be a bit like last time. It won't be noticed that we've gone from Amy to Kia, or from Kia to another provider if that's the case.
I know they're just 2 bidders.
Yes.
Which
that's in the public domain anyway. So that is Kia. So that's in the public domain, Chair. Yeah. It's Kia and a company called SNC Lavalin, who just for background, they're a very big construction company, and broader than that, so broader than construction over North America, Canada in particular, and the parent company for Atkins. So most people know Atkins this side of the Atlantic, so they're Atkins' parent company. So yeah, they're the.
Can I ask one kind of related question? Does the council receive funding for specifically pothole repairs? And how does that fit into this contract? Is this for general resurfacing maintenance or?
Generally, when we entered into the PFI arrangement, most local authorities bid for all sorts of different capital pots of money of government. And then in addition to that, you have the revenue money that the council allocates to deal with things such as operational maintenance and things like that. When we entered into the PFI contract, we stepped out of that regime, and the idea being that you bring all of that together, so we don't generally qualify for most forms of capital money for highway maintenance. And that's all wrapped up in that PFI grant. There are some instances of funding from DFT that become available from time to time, which tend to be one-off pothole funds and things like that. And when we get an opportunity to do that, and when we're permitted to bid for it, we do. So the answer is that pothole funding would remain outside of it, because all of our capital money is wrapped up in the grant.
Brooks, you want to comment?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Clearly, this is a very important PFI contract, and the DFT grants that we can access are really significant in terms of our repairs and maintenance budgets. But given that the contract is originated some time ago, and the issues have changed since during the duration of the contract, to what extent are you able to reflect within the new contract our commitment to zero carbon, for instance? I understand that the timescales that you're working on must be incredibly short in terms of getting it to burn. Just welcome some comments that you're able to make.
Sure, and again, I'll probably let dominate some of the detail. I'll give you some examples of how things have changed in terms of the approach to what we're re-procuring as opposed to what we set out, which was effectively actually 2007, 8 probably in terms of the original specification, business case, etc. So I think, on timescales, they are tight for, even though 2 years sounds a long time. It is incredibly tough for something of this size and nature and complexity, particularly when the dialogue sessions we're going through at the moment. It is an iterative process. I think one good example, I don't know if Don give a better one on sustainability and sort of green and climate change agenda, but take for instance social value as something that's changed dramatically since 2010. But there is a lot more emphasis now in the evaluation and the effort being put into the bids now than it would have been in 2010 in terms of what it brings for social value. So 20% of the evaluation for the tender is based.
20% of the overall evaluation score is allocated to social value. So that reflects the council's policy commitment.
Yeah. Does that include the area of sustainability and
off the top of my head, I can't remember how the sustainability is evaluated, but the issue of route to zero and commitment to that. But although this is BHL's procurement, it's still procuring a service that, as I said, that it's got to be one that we want to buy. And as part of that, in fact, an integral part of our business case to government will have to include a carbon management plan. So the full business case will include the carbon management plan as bid back by the bidder that we propose to proceed with. So all of those kind of things have been picked up. I think social value particularly started literally just after this contract did. So as a result, it wasn't reflected in those arrangements, but we've moved with the times, as it were.
Thank you.
Sorry, just following up, because that's a good point. Is that the sustainability and the social value of the company in itself having to demonstrate that they are a company that is, sustainable and they are themselves, how they work, or is it actually the difference in the materials which they are going to be using and to fix the pavements, and is there a kind of, well, actually they are using particular different types of materials or not concretes, or actually there's a difference in how they're going to be fixing pavements or anything like that, or So is it the actual company demonstrating we are sustainable because we don't use paper and all that stuff, which I know you do?
Unsurprisingly, the answer to that's going to be both. There's an element to that which is around their credentials,
Yeah.
the credentials of the company in terms of their green credentials and what they do more broadly as a company, as you say. So yes, that very much is part of it. So they're, again, their own company's carbon management plan, their own, in terms of how they approach things like their fleet. In particular, fleet is a huge issue in terms of these sort of things. You mentioned it, and the second part of that is then about those works that we've got to deliver, how they're going to bring elements of carbon reduction, climate change, low emissions to that as well. So yes, some of that will be around, as you say, things like materials. Some of that will be around some of that could go down to their approach to how they apply investment to the network. Do it once and then you don't have to do it again, and that sort of thing. Some of that can be around their sort of approach and processes. But then a lot of that will be driven as well about the question of innovation. So, like we say, looking at more innovative materials, more innovative way of delivering, and that will form part of their submission on sustainability and climate change. But again, anything else you want to add to that, Dom?
No, I think probably what we didn't talk about it was just about reusing surfacing material.
Yeah.
So that's one of the key ways that we can be more sustainable in doing that, and that's actually been a feature of this since the beginning. Using materials that take the arisings that from the material you've just taken out, and then various technical processes to make that reusable. So there are some things down there.
Thank you very much. The one thing I haven't heard is aligning with other programmes and projects within the City Council. And I know we did this right at the beginning of the contract. I always cite the Dovecall Land Village example. So where are we in terms of this contract with aligning with projects, for example, by the Highways and Capital Investment Programme,
Ward minor measures,
Safe Routes to School schemes, the Transport for Capital Highways Investment Programme, and anything that sits inside the City Region Sustainable Transport Settlement, which obviously is part of the combined authority rather than City Council, but the actual work on the ground, a lot of that will be in Birmingham. So how do we actually make sure all these programmes are aligned to get value for money for the taxpayer?
Yeah. So I think, and again, I'll let Darwin on end to give the details. For me, this is about, we obviously can't be specific when we go out with the bid document and the contract about, because this is till 2035, so we can't talk about specific programmes and pots of funding that currently exist. What we can do is put something in there around that. That is part of what we expect from a service provider, is that they will look to align whatever potential works and other programs there are going on. So we can't be specific about the pots, but the general ethos about combined, joined up work will be absolutely in there as an onus on the service provider to ensure that happens. And there's so take it right to the top, as you say, Councillor, in terms of some of the sort of regional funding side of this, and a really good example of how we've done that over the past 12 months, the works we delivered ahead of the Commonwealth Games, and we delivered a lot of that work, particularly on the A34 and the A45 through the Sprint scheme. So something that's being delivered by TfWM. It's an opportunity there for us where we've also got adjacent works or works that might have come forward in future years, looking to bring those forward, bring those into the Sprint works, do it once. It's a more efficient way of doing it in terms of the costs. So those opportunities are taken. They are difficult sometimes to spot and align, I think it's fair to say, but that onus will be very much on the service provider to do that with whatever programs come at us in the next 13 years. So I don't know, anything you want to
just briefly, I mean, those requirements haven't changed because they're the right thing to do. So we are keeping those requirements there. Ultimately, it'll be a matter of that coming through with the bids and the programmes that actually get generated by the provider. So we would expect to see that in there, and it's in the requirements for their submission. They're to bring those things together because it supports our management duty.
So perhaps it will come into the next presentation as well.
Yeah.
Definitely.
Okay, cool.
Thank you. Just picking up on that a little bit, I'm wondering, do Kia or whoever the provider is receive extra money for things like, say, specifically the LTN project, which received funding to run? They're the ones picking up problems when files are removed, for example. Did they also receive? Are we getting extra funding to do with that additional? So is that coming from the sort of main budget?
Again, I'll let Don talk to this in more detail, but effectively the city can, in most cases, the LTN is an example, where capital funding is provided by government departments. Very rarely, and I can't think of a case at all, to be honest with you, is do you get any revenue funding that goes with it? So the process should be when we're looking at new capital schemes like LTN or it's a new junction, whatever it is that the first place we should look at through that capital delivery mechanism is how we could potentially reduce other maintenance costs to us. For instance, decluttering is something that to taking out poles and signs that we can do. So that effectively looks to offset anything new that we're putting in, like bollards and the like, by taking things that are already on the network out. So that's the first step in doing that. Beyond that, if they can't get it to a point where it's a sort of neutral ask in terms of future revenue implications, there is, and this was 2012 report went to cabinet in terms of the principle that the city council will set aside a budget policy contingency effectively for paying for the revenue consequences of our capital growth. So that is a process that we go through. Every scheme that comes through the city council's transport highways planning department now comes through what we call the Transport Highway Board, which I chair with Phil Evans. And the purpose of that is to ensure we're capturing all those revenue consequences and that therefore we can put them against it. We understand clearly what's being put against the revenue policy contingency fund that was put aside in 2012. Tell me if I said anything wrong there, Don.
No, that's totally right. I think just to pick up on your specific point in terms of what do we pay extra for, really, that was one of the questions about, wasn't it? So,
more that there's the initial cost of putting in bollards, for example, but then there's the additional cost of going to replace them, going to fix them, and you have that. And I'm just wondering if that's factored in and how that's paid for.
So, effectively, what we're paying for with this is to maintain the network as is. If you're going to change the network, then that's something the city council funds with capital money, and as Kevin said, there's a revenue consequence of that. The general principle for when we're back into a PFI position is that you will pay one charge for that all those maintenance services to maintain the network as it currently is, and if the network changes, the charge changes.
Any further questions?
Well, again, and I know this from various schemes across the city, is that if it is a developer rather than city council who is changing the network, the road network, then those the costs of any additional costs of any changes to the network, I understand, are borne by the developer, because the cost is worked out on a 25 to 30 year basis, and a one-off cost is normally paid when it has been settled how much the additional cost would be to the city council to maintain that network. So it's the developer pays.
So yeah, third part of what I'm talking about quite right now is stuff that LTNs was the example. So things that council put in that we have to address as I've described. You're quite right, Councillor Huxtable. Third party cost developers, they pay what's called a commuted sum, which is calculated on the basis you just described, and that's what actually funds the ongoing maintenance of those for that period of 25 to 30 years. It's calculated and it's taken from developing.
Sorry, just to clarify, the commuted sum is only in relation to things that are above standard requirements. So if a developer is bringing something to the city council that is a standard constructed highway using standard materials, standard quality lighting, rather than something that's enhanced and fancy to enhance the value of their development, it's standard quality. The council will support that because that's part of supporting development in the city. If the developers put the stuff on there that's whistles and bells that add value to their development, the community sum is there to reflect that additional cost that the council has to maintain.
Okay, a couple of questions from myself. When we had this 45-year contract with Amy, what we're aiming for, first 4 5 years capital investment in the streets, lights, highways, and footpaths. And we all know it didn't happen, and then we started being problems. And so now this re-procurement of the contract, is that going to put us where we got stuck, or it's totally new? So in those terms, we got money we have lost some of the program already through dispute with Amy, or we make it for a long time within the time we had actually new procurement with them. The second question was, I recall that the PFA we had that time was Mark 1, so-called Mark 1, you know, then subsequent PFI were slightly improved. So are we going back to the Mark 1 version for the PFI model, or are we going to the improved model? And thirdly, we have some issues with Amy, they were disputing the assets, what we gave them, whether intentionally or non-intentionally. They're saying we didn't have this on our list, so they want us to pay extra. We said some trees were not on the list. They say it's not on the cost, so we can't touch them. So that incurred extra cost to it. But then we had a number of issues, like we had gaps, assets, lost time, and are we going to do something better and make sure that what we want to do is get our ratings and our bases to see the improvements what we want to see, like new footpath, new pavement and improved lights.
I'll pick up some of those and then fill in the gaps as usual. I think just on to what we call, what you described there, is things that they didn't think, they didn't know they had responsibility for. So we call that asset inventory. So yeah, back in 2010, it's fair to say there were some gaps in the knowledge about what assets we had in that respect. I think what we can say moving forward is that we've got all that time we've had with them. So the inventory, the asset inventory was updated as Amy went through it. I think the last 2 years that we've had with Kia, part of the reason for the time we've taken with that has been to get like an independent view on the inventory that we've got and the asset condition that we've got as well. So that when we've got bidders going into it this time, they've got a lot of confidence and quite confidence that we're going to get that issue that you described there about tree that they didn't know about. So I think we've got a far better idea, probably answering your question as best I can. We've got a far better idea now than we had in 2008, 2009 before we went into the contract on that. So I think we've got a lot more confidence in that. I think on the, and this comes down to the real fundamental part of that. We're making up for lost time, as you put it on. The idea was on the, as with any PFIs, the first 5 years are there as a means of we call that a core investment period, so a capital injection for 5 years. Effectively brings you up to a standard of, let's just take roads conditions as an example, takes you up to a standard there, and then for the remaining 20 years, you look to just sustain it through to hand back in 2035. That was the model. As you say, Chair, that we never got to that point where that core investment period was completed due to the problem we flagged up on through court on the way that they weren't delivering the contract in the way that it was intended to be delivered. So now we don't have, as you say, that is, and we have a network that has deteriorated again due to the 2 to 3 years that Amy didn't put any investment into the network due to their dispute. We have put a lot more, obviously, into the last 2 years. So, as Thomas, I think you said, the cabinet approval is for 148 million between 2020 and when we go back into the PFI contract now in November 23. So that is again a bit of an injection of capital, but it goes back to the point we can only put as much. There's no more money in the project as a whole. DFT committed to their grant. BCC are committed to the revenue we put in. There's no more money to be had. So answer your question, we'll never make up for that lost time. We will never get to the level of condition that was originally intended when we did the original business case in 2010. That just has to be very clear from the outset. What we will do from here on in is we will get the best possible conditions for all the assets and for the set of services we've got to procure from the money we have left in the project. And I think that's the commitment that we've got. We will never reach what we intended to back in 2010. And again, I don't know if you want to pick up on that one and then the question of PFI and PFI2.
Sure, actually understood that question.
Well, when we had the PFI the first day from ago, there were like embryonic PFI states where I think it was somebody in Plymouth and they had the PFI first, then some other, and we were the second, third largest PFI. And subsequently, there was some hospital being built on the PFI, and they were being under different conditions.
So PFI as a mechanism goes through various stages which we've got and the form it takes. So just as an example, our contract was procured on what is a Treasury outline called SOPC4, which is standard from PFI contracts version 4. There were subsequent ones, there were ones before that, and there have also been other forms of PFI, such as PF2, which is a slightly different way of doing it. Kevin mentioned one the other day, which was
MIN.
I still forget what it
I think it was
multi-supply investment, which is a model that the Welsh government used. All of these come under a form of, essentially they're a form of public-private partnership. So the private sector is engaged to deliver public infrastructure works. And it's a way of just ring-fencing funding. They're all pretty similar.
Mm-hmm.
The only difference is that the detail of any individual contract will be different from time to time. So we were the second highways PFI. Portsmouth was the first. Sheffield came after us. They've got a different contract to us. Hounslow also has a different contract, and so on. Probably the one element that does tend to be common between highway infrastructure PFIs is that there have been a lot of just street lighting ones, and they're done to more or less standard form. That's probably more reflective of the fact that that kind of asset can be dealt with in that kind of way.
Right, so any further questions? Wish you good luck, and let's hope we get this back on track, and let's have all highway structure can improve again. Thanks, Dominic, and thank you. Yeah. I think so. We go back to the agenda. Which was 5, no, 6, 5. Go back to Article 5. That's the street works permit scheme, and we have contract manager, major projects.
Yeah. Thank you, Chair. Good afternoon.
Do you want me to lead in, Mo, again?
Yeah, if you want to.
We'll do the same sort of thing. So I'll be staying for this knowledge, but this is part of my area as well. So thanks, Chair. Very brief sort of introduction, because this is probably something that's less familiar to people than the idea of maintaining potholes and street lights, etc. So this is about what we describe as network management. So in particular, the street works permits subject, which we'll describe today. This is about, for absolute clarity, the control that we have over companies, let's just say larger utilities, so gas, water, electric, how they access the highway network to do basic roadworks and repairs. And we have a system at the moment under what's called the New Roads and Street Works Act, what's called notices. So they have to provide us with a notice of when they intend to come and dig up and disrupt our highway and disrupt the traffic to do that. And they put a notice into us. We have a noticing team. We have a set of inspectors which are currently run through PFI contract, who will look to control and coordinate and ensure that no one overstays their welcome on the network, and they stick to the conditions of the notice that they've put into us. what we're describing here today is we're moving into a different system of what's called street works permitting now. So that was it's a mechanism again the government put in some time ago. Many other authorities have already started implementing that. We're just going through the process because we took a cabinet paper back in April this year, which describes the process we need to go through, which includes things like effectively setting up a new team to deliver this. It also looks to bring in-house some of those functions from that currently sit out with Kia. So again, the inspections and the noticing sits with Kia at the moment, but moving into street works permits, it will move back into the city council, so we have greater oversight and control of that. And ultimately, what this gives us, not just through the charging mechanism that's associated with street works permits, it gives us an income stream that enables us to resource up our street works controls in a lot stronger way. So we're getting more inspectors, more people being able to approve and assess the permits when the applications when they're put into us. But also we can put conditions onto permits now in order that we can get again a greater level of control over what those utilities and what those companies are doing out of the network. So again, won't steal too much of Mo's thunder on this because we've got a little bit to go through. But I'll hand over to Mo, who is the traffic manager and works in our street works team.
Yeah, thank you. Good afternoon, everybody. So as I've already been introduced, it's Mo Khan, short for Mohammed. I've been a traffic manager for several years now with the City Council, formerly working for the previous PFI incumbent, which was Amy. So I've got a lot of background and knowledge on this. So not sure whether I've shot myself in the foot by an accident. But just before I move on through the presentation, Councillor Huxtable, if I can just address the final point on that slide is the statutory duty to coordinate works. One of the questions you asked previously under the renegotiation of the PFI contract was what measures we're going to put in place or oversee to ensure that the PFI contractor will be maximising those opportunities. So the final backstop, if you like, is that statutory process for coordinating works. We have a statutory framework that exists that Highway Authority works will enter into, as well as third-party utility works. So where those programmes are aligned, we can identify opportunities or schemes on a particular route or part of the network. We can bring those two promoters together, be that different work streams internally within the Highway Authority or then an external third-party works provider as well. So there is an additional layer to hopefully maximising those opportunities. So what we'll do, move on.
Can I come back to that later, Chair?
So I think first of all, as Kevin has already outlined, the current system operates under a noticing system which assumes authorisation by the works promoter. They will submit an electronic notice that goes in through a central streetworks register. The current level of resource that we have is going to be increased by operating this permit scheme. So we will have greater visibility of that and control over it. So changing the system into a permit scheme gives us the legal ability now, rather than assume consent, which is what the works promoters do at the moment. We actually have the ability now to approve, request a modification or outright reject that application. So they cannot start work until we have granted, or in the worst case scenario, that application has deemed. So if we've not had the opportunity to review that permit request, it can deem, which is a risk that we need to make sure doesn't happen. So the benefits of that, like I say, we're actively granting consent now. Some of those benefits include a reduction in the overall time that utilities will programme to undertake works. So there is a cost associated with applying for a permit, and there are essentially 4 work tiers or 4 cost brackets, dependent on what the categorisation of that works is. So the most reactive is emergency works through to major works. And there are prescribed timescales for the planned works activities that then determine the cost of that permit. So at the moment, under a noticing scheme, there is no incentive for a utility to minimise their occupation of the highway. But in the permit scheme, if a scheme which is currently 4 days costs £105 in the permit world, if they then condense that work programme into something that is 3 days or less, it becomes a minor works permit, which I think is about £65. So instantly there is a financial driver from the works promoters side of things to start reducing their durations. We have a wealth of information in the existing street works register, which gives us the ability to review average actual durations. So again, with those permit officers in place, when we get those permit requests in, even if somebody has applied for a duration of 5 or 6 days for what could be a simple stop tap renewal on the customer supply, we can look back at historic data and say, well, actually, your average actual performance for that type of job has been 3 days. So we can impose the variation on the utility that reduces their duration down to that 3 days as well. So that's, I think, some of the, if you like, practical benefits. It will also see an uplift in the number of permit officers that we have or inspectors out on the network. So all of those conditions and permit obligations that we're putting in administratively, if they're not being complied with on site by those utilities, then there is also a more substantial punitive measure in terms of the fixed penalty notices that can be issued. So, for example, if we were to request that a utility start works after 9:30 and they were on the network, at 9 o'clock, if the inspector was in the area or was, reported through that there's an issue, we can send them out. And if they're found to be contravening those conditions, then it's a simple FPN. So those are some of the practical benefits of moving from this noticing system at the moment that we use into permits. It's worthwhile pointing out that all of that preamble was primarily aimed at, shall we say, third-party works promoters, so the utility companies. As the Highway Authority and in fulfilling our network management duty, those rules apply equally to our own works. So the permitting regime applies to street and road works. So the simplest definition, street works is carried out by utilities, those organisations with a statutory right to carry out works in the highway, and roadworks is essentially highway maintenance. So our own subcontractor or service provider will have to comply with the same permitting rules. And one of the reasons why we brought the service back in-house was so that we, as the authority, can oversee that equal application of the rules and parity between both our own service provider, rather than being administered by the service provider for their own works. It will be administered by us so we can see how both sets of works are performing. There is a risk in that we have to provide, as part of an annual process, once the permit scheme has been implemented, a set of performance statistics into the DFT. So those compliance, the compliance data for utilities will apply equally to our own works. So if we have been issuing fixed penalty notices to a utility company, if we find that Kia or a future service provider is exceeding, shall we say, the level of FPNs and contraventions that our utility colleagues are, then DFT I think are going to be extremely interested, and we will then, the issues that can bring, it's not only reputational damage to the authority, it's also then potential intervention. So if a permitting authority seems to be failing by the DFT could, worst case scenario, impose an independent traffic manager on the authority to get their performance back to where it needs to be. So take that very seriously. I think this is probably one of the final slides. We obviously receive on a regular basis lots of inquiries and questions about works that are ongoing at this moment in time. The new permitting system utilises a newly introduced central streetworks register, which is called Street Manager. So all authority works and utility works go into a central database. And one of the reasons why the DFT made this change was so that that data can be used in an open format. So one of the benefits that that brings is that anybody around the country now can log into a website called One Network, and that gives you live data of what is actually consented or authorised on your street. So at the moment, as I said, it will show you all of those works that utilities have notified Birmingham of, but in the future, it will show those works that only have a valid permit on. So I think that's it from me.
Second, from Jeremy.
No, you're good.
I've got some questions. Firstly, just on that One Network scheme, I had an inquiry about this from a constituent who said that whilst acknowledging that it is a positive thing, Birmingham City Council doesn't currently have the subscription that allows you to look at it on mobile devices.
Right.
Is that something that is due to change? Because I think that like some of the details get hidden, and it just says that we don't have the appropriate subscription. And do we, as a permitting authority, are we able to demand that roadwork information signage that is placed in advance of planned works and cycleways impacted by works are repaired to the same satisfaction, and also the walking and cycling diversions are sensible, signed, and where possible, cycle access is maintained rather than prioritising cars? And then last point from me is sort of what is some of the criteria for refusing some of these permits? I think one of the main frustrations that I find from constituents is when a road will be closed, so they'll take a different route and that road's closed to something else, and then another one that that sort of be factored in. No, there are too many roads nearby that are closed, so we're not going to accept this one until one of them's finished. That concept.
Well, that's you,
Yeah, thank you. Right, you may have to jog my memory because there's quite a few points there. I think the initial one in terms of One Network, you're absolutely right. At the moment, there is, I think, a basic subscription that we are subscribing to. That will change as the permit module gets switched on. We will be looking at increasing that so that forward visibility is there. So the detail of the works doesn't just show us a question mark and, we're currently not a subscriber. So we've already picked that one up. I think in terms of, I'll pick up the last point next about those multiple occupancies on adjacent streets and diversion routes. So that absolutely is a key driving factor of the permit scheme. Having the resource then to validate works within a defined geographical area is going to be key. We will also have the ability now to plot those diversion routes. So, for example, if there is works that involve a total closure, the diversion route can also now be plotted in the system so that if another permit request comes in on one of those roads being used as a diversion route, that would be a point blank refusal. It's being used for another purpose.
Cycling and walking, specific cycling and walking signs and advance, I think advance.
Yeah, so in certain key locations and depending on the nature of the works. So as a general rule of thumb, the majority of the existing officers will already, for major schemes, request that advance warning signs go out, specifically where works involve road closures, probably more so than anything else. And that will continue. We can address then, like you say, if there are larger or more complicated junctions, large signalisation of junctions adds significant delay to the network. So rather than road closed here, in 3 weeks' time, find alternative route, we can actually just say that there will be substantial works at this location if the road is going to remain open. So we can again, and this is part of those conditions that I mentioned. So if they haven't done that at the moment, we've got a rule and tap them over the knuckles and say, haven't you been naughty? In the future, if they haven't done that, if that was a condition on the permit, then it's a fixed penalty notice because they've not complied with those conditions that's been attached. Cycling and walking routes, Fortunately, I refer to traffic as all modes. So for me, the most appropriate and suitable diversion route where work's being carried out on the network is what we always strive to achieve. The difficulty we have at the moment with the advent of a lot more segregated cycle routes is that for temporary schemes, it's not always a simple case of providing the same amenity on an alternative route. So yeah, we will do our best with that. But in terms of maintaining pedestrian access, footway closures and asking people to cross the road is always done as a last resort. We work with all works promoters, whether that be a developer, a utility company, or our own works, to provide a safe adjacent walkway where possible. That's always the first request. And then, like you say, worst case scenario is crossover. The final nuclear option is a complete pedestrian or cycle diversion. They're only done as a last resort.
Thank you. No, yeah, I just wanted to also add that I think that this does sound really positive. I think anything that gives us more control as an authority over our own sort of cycleways and pavements is good in my books. So, yeah, thank you for that.
Yeah, sorry, I've got a few, so I'll just I'll take them in turn. But I think
Take them in turn.
I'll just so they fall into actually kind of the first lot is the point that Alex has made actually, and particularly this has come up kind of probably in the past couple of weeks, a number of constituents, my constituents or generally, because there are Severn Trent works in kind of the Selly Oak area, which is kind of causing particular disruption. And actually it has been over the past week that there is all over kind of Northfield, Kings Norton, wherever you go in the morning, that it's gridlocked everywhere. So as it stands at the moment, in terms of managing any works done on the streets and the roads, whether it is third-party utilities, so Severn Trent, but then other roadworks, is that at the moment, there's not the ability to coordinate it? Is that?
So there is an ability to coordinate it. It's done through a slightly different process. So as an authority, we have the ability where we can to work with those works promoters when they're applying for their traffic management approval. And I think one of the things that we're experiencing at the moment, as all other authorities across the country saw, immediately in advance of their permit schemes going live, a lot of utilities tried to do a lot of last minute jobs. So at the moment, the current structure, is almost being inundated with that level of work.
Right, okay.
I think I was going to just chip in two things on that, possibly from my perspective. Number one is that we are aware, particularly, and we have talked to other neighbouring authorities around this, particularly Severn Trent do seem to be causing a few issues in that regard at the moment, and I do have an action to raise this with the chief executive of Severn Trent in terms of that as an overall approach and behaviour at the moment. So, and I think there's a different discussion going on amongst the regional traffic managers to that extent as well. So I think that there's a particular issue there, perhaps with one of the works promoters that we need to just take to task on. I think the other one is difficult because we've said about looking to coordinate that overall activity. There are exemptions and exceptions to what we can do and what we can control. So, for instance, if something needs repairing as an emergency, a burst water main, a gas leak, whatever it is, we don't have any real control over stopping that happening. That's going to happen. Similarly, with things like customer connections, particularly for BT and broadband, and sort of, there are exemptions that those utilities have under the legislation for them to go and do it, to go and do the works that they need to do. So we will monitor, control, coordinate where we can. There will always be some exceptions. I mean, some of that sometimes comes with the weather. So again, burst water main and burst services, when you start getting to colder weather, you tend to see a proliferation again of Severn Trent emergency works going on, which can cause the sort of problems to it. I'm not convinced that's what's going on in Selly Oak, by the way, but that can add to the overall perception of a lot going on the network.
Yeah, but it just seems to be, I think that there are particular particular kind of main trunk roads or kind of used for commuters that are actually in various directions blocked off for roadworks. So there is kind of particularly bits in Northfield and Church Road, and that was causing actually all the way back to Cotteridge, and then you've got and it just seems that I mean, and that's why I welcome it. This permit scheme is actually addressing this point that there is greater coordination when it comes to assessing any works and really looking at the wider picture about, well, look, these are our main commuter routes and these are, we know, the busiest routes, not just in the immediate vicinity of actually what's the little bit of the diverted, but actually the wider impact that has on, it can have over 3 or 4 wards and the traffic build up. And so if that is going to be, that's part of the ability of this scheme.
And yet, some of this is about the greater controls it gives us with the sort of some of the exceptions put there. I think the big thing for me is it's going to give us more resource to be able to go in. Some of this is, and I'll be honest with some of the particular utilities, is catch me if you can, you know, it's a case of unless we know what's going on in the network, we don't know what's going on. We haven't got, as most touched earlier, inspectors going out there doing every single. How many openings do we have roughly in a year? But it's massively beyond what we'd be able to inspect. So having additional inspection resource to be able to go in and tackle some of these issues when they're happening is going to be really key, as well as the controls that the permits themselves bring. Enforcement and inspection of those is actually real benefit for me. The additional resource we've got to do that through charging for the permits.
And then the other two are kind of probably linked in terms of the money generated or from this. Where is that going? Is that going kind of back in basically to be able to pay for the inspection and to keep it going, or will there be any surplus? And then also, is there actually there's something else as well, so I'll just tell you what it's so far. Is there a potential impact upon the PFI contract in a way, and actually, are we going to be out of pocket a little bit? Because if you are saying that you are going to, they will have to apply for permits. So they'll have to be built in, won't it? They'll be saying, well, actually, each time we will have to be paying this much. And actually, there's a point where you can see them putting a little bit on top, and actually, we're already getting them in the council 70 as opposed to, so I can see that kind of, you've got to be careful that actually they're not going to be over-egging and we're going to be out of pocket because we're not getting back from them in the permit. And in terms of, I appreciate them, we'll all be able to have access then, won't we? Because I think with councillors, it's quite useful for councillors to be able to know exactly what works are happening within the ward, but presumably we have access to it. And that's for us to be able to check as opposed to being, but other flags, I mean, would be useful, or input from us as about actually what particular requirements you might be able to have on any of them. So yeah, those are my last.
I'll talk in a bit like we've done momentarily where I'm there, right? So just on, I think start off the money that's generated from it, would probably be useful, Chair. We will circulate the cabinet report we took in April just to clarify the business case for that. But because I'm conscious, I think most of you mentioned probably were here in April anyway. So I'll circulate that. So that describes in a bit more detail how the finances work. But effectively, as you said, it's ring fenced primarily to support the delivery of the service.
Yeah.
Any surplus we make of it, this is what's written into the legislation and regulations that cover it. Any surplus that's generated by that is put into a ring fenced account that we will then review on a 12-month rolling basis, but over a 3-year period. About if there's any surplus generated, that will then impact on the level of permit charges that we levy effectively. So if we've got a surplus, we may be able to reduce the permit charge. It's not point being with it all, it's not there as to generate cash for the council. And that's been very. It's supposed to be cost neutral. Is the background behind. We'll clarify, and Mo will tell me I'm wrong on this, but my understanding of what we're doing in terms of authority owned works, what they're still required to go through the same permitting regime, we don't charge. Yeah.
Right.
So there isn't sorry, I thought I was laughing. There isn't an internal shop or internal recharge mechanism for the very reason given is that it doesn't help anybody. All it does is take more time. But they will be held the same, going back to the reporting we've got to do to the DFT, they will be held to the same standards as everybody else on them. So they'll still be, in terms of parity, the point of parity, they will be held to the same account. And then I think just on member engagement, yeah, you obviously got the one network piece we put up there. I think there does have to be a commitment there, particularly on major works. And we touched on some advanced plan work. I think there does have to be a commitment there on this one in terms of that engagement with members on some of those major long running works that particular road closure involved with it.
Yeah, I think in the early days, you know, we were all circulating spreadsheets and programs, and there was different teams providing different formats and different utilities would present things in slightly different ways. So coordinating and bringing together a central list of planned major works was always a bit of a nightmare. We do in the background, in addition to one network, which is the information that is live in the system, to combat that issue with multiple spreadsheets and what's the current latest version. We moved over a couple of years back to a GIS-based system, which TFWM hosts for us currently. So I think one of the things that we can work through with Luke on his return is providing access, I think, to that, because there's essentially two layers to that. So this statutory coordination that I was referring to earlier on, utility works promoters and our own works should be providing an annual forward look at what they are bringing forward in the city over the next 12 months. So that information is captured now in that GIS system. So there is no, we don't hold anybody to account based on the information that's provided. We use it as a reference tool when we get applications, say, well, actually, Severn Trent had a mains renewal based on Lewis Road as a prime example. Are they still going ahead because Cadent have now got customer connection? Is it going to clash? There's been no update from Severn Trent. So it's there in the background, but it will be useful if you do get any inquiries on that long-term look ahead. But really and truly, the committed major works will be those that have what's called now a provisional advanced authorisation, which is a 3-month advance permit that goes into the system. So that's anything with a road closure, traffic regulation order associated with it, or has a duration of 11 days or more.
Should point out, just in response to that, the reference to somebody called Luke is Luke Keane, who is our highway network manager. So, but Luke became a father for the second time on Monday, so it's just started his paternity leave. So Mo stepped in at the last minute, but as you can probably tell, is more than capable of covering in Luke's absence whilst he's away on paternity leave. But yeah, when Luke, as you say, a lot of this will start moving on when Luke returns from that.
Councillor Green?
Thank you, Chair. My observation of roadworks is that when they start, a sign is put out, we'll finish by the end of this month. And the following month, the sign changes to the next month, and the following month, it changes to a sign with no date. What effect on that will this scheme have, do you think?
It should limit those instances. In the first instance is the simple answer. So the permit, when it's issued, has a duration.
Yes.
And that is the agreed duration. Now, obviously, there are instances for engineering reasons that, if whilst excavating, there's specialist repair that's needed, or they've hit concrete, it's going to take longer. Because we have tighter rules now on the extension period and the process that a utility can request an extension within, I think it's something like within 20% of the original duration, or 2 days of the end date, yeah? So whichever is the greater is what applies. So on that basis as well, with our network inspectors out on the street, we have more of them than we currently have through the current service. So where we have those instances of people reporting no activity today, no activity yesterday, no activity the day before, our inspectors will also be monitoring that level of site activity. They'll be engaging with the site managers of whomever the works promoter is and saying, right, what's happening? Where are you in your 3-day duration? Where are you in your 3-month duration? And if, for let's call it a simple failing of delivery of that utility company, if it comes to the point where they then request an extension, our inspectors will have had forward visibility of their progress up to that point. So if it's just been a pure lack of commitment on behalf of that works promoter, we've got an evidence base to say, well, actually, half of your duration, the site's been unoccupied, nobody's been on site, and you're not getting your extension. So what that actually then does is trigger an overrun charging period. So the works will continue to be occupying the network, but because they have exceeded their agreed period, their reasonable period, it then goes into an overrun charge.
Is the overrun charge sufficient that it makes a difference?
Yes. So the overrun charge is based on the category of street, first of all. So on traffic sensitive streets, it's been a while since I've looked at the charging matrix, but I believe the highest daily charge is £25,000 a day.
Oh, right.
Yeah. So it's there, it focuses them.
And I think just coming back on that, was that one, as you say, I think, as you said, the level of fines is key there as an incentive for them to do that. I think it perhaps always sounds a little bit worth saying it here, don't worry, it'll be better next time. I think the empirical evidence from all those authorities that have put permit schemes in, of which, there have been, working about this, there are many before us, they have seen that reduction in the occupation of the network as a result of that. So it does work, I think, is the point of the business case. And that's what we want to see with Birmingham as well as is happening with other authorities.
Thank you.
Yeah, no, I go back. And one of the most frustrating things is when you see a proactive highways maintenance scheme, and then you see a contractor dig it up, an external contractor, a few weeks, a few months after that work has actually been done. Because I think in terms of highways assets, is that if you then cut into a highways asset, it reduces the lifespan by about a third, because there's inevitably cracks, there's water can get into, and so on and so forth. So will this scheme, once operational, actually stop them from happening? Because I thought we already had powers to stop work happening for a period of time after a proactive maintenance scheme, as in we did not give permission, and if they went ahead and did it anyway without our permission, we could already fine them.
So I'll let Mo come back on the detail of that, but what I would say about I don't know the statute you could quote there in terms of if you like, the loss of life of an asset by reinstatement being done in, but I think a lot of that comes down to the quality of the reinstatement in terms of the reduction in the life of the asset. So I think that has to be borne in mind. I think what we can say, where those things will occur, because as we're about to tell you, they could still occur, that there'll be reasons I've already given that these things could still occur, is what it does give us the ability to do again is ensuring the quality of the reinstatement done doesn't eat through the life, the potential life time of that asset in the way you described. Because there will be the need to do, there will still be, and Mo will tell again whenever I'm wrong on this, customer connections will be something that we can't control. If you say, if we resurfaced a road in your area next week, and yet the week after somebody comes in and says there's a broadband connection or a water connection they're doing, they still will have the ability to be able to do that. We can't control that, even with the sort of controls that you're talking about in the new Residence Street we talked about. Protected streets, has it got the right term?
Section 50.
Yeah, Section 50. Even with that, they can come in and do that. Similarly with repairs, birds, that sort of thing. So we've always got to acknowledge that the best we can do, I think, in terms of ensuring that circumstance doesn't happen, is the work we do ahead of the programme that we do in terms of, and that's why it takes with the asset, the investment programme that you all see as councils with the highways maintenance. That's why some of that takes a little bit of time to work through. It is about working through not just with yourselves and citizens and community groups. It is about talking to utilities about what potential they have in terms of their own asset investment programs. So ensuring that we don't get that happen afterwards is probably the best we can do, really. And so we have no guarantees that you're not going to get that even with these powers, because there is still the utilities still have the powers to do that under certain circumstances. So, but what this does give us is a greater oversight, greater control over the quality of the reinstatements that are done in those circumstances. That's fair to say. Does that help, Kat?
Yes.
Yeah.
It would be nice when I email about said works that have actually happened on a practical basis, I actually get a response.
Okay.
I'm working at one.
Okay.
Never got a response.
Can we run that for the other meeting, please?
Yes.
Okay, Councillor Fox.
Yeah, sorry, just a couple of things. When does this scheme start?
Oh, yes, sorry, I should have opened with that at the start, but to be fair, so we're looking at, it will probably be, we're looking at January next year in terms of the start of the permit scheme. That's the current date. We are working through, as ever, the go live date will be impacted in terms of some of the, I think it's fair to say, software and technology support that we're working through. But the current estimate is it will be January. It may move into February, but it will be. We've also got to do a sort of four-week consultation with the utilities before we implement, just as a statutory requirement. But I think we'll update the chair possibly through this group in terms of the when it's going live. But at the moment we're looking at early January.
And just a couple of other things. Since I've become a councillor, the biggest complaints I get are, well, firstly, I never know what's going on in my ward. So I get people come to me saying, corner junction of Churchill Road and Springfield Road has got traffic light signals and all the rest of it. I have no idea. Nobody's told me about it. I don't get any communication with bats. So I'm already on the back foot because residents are putting me on the spot. And some of them haven't had letters either, so they're not aware of it. Secondly, when these people, obviously when you drive past and there's no one there, that's irritating. But when they do go, they normally leave behind loads of street furniture stuff behind them, bollards, lights, traffic signals. So when you have this duration when they have to leave, does that include taking away the rubbish they leave behind? Because that is a big bugbear. They just leave it lying, and sometimes you see weeks afterwards actually. So I don't know who goes along and inspects those. So yeah, those are my two things really. And certainly giving this prior notification, I never even heard of One Network for my sins until 5 minutes ago, and I'm just clicking on it now. And I'm looking at things that are coming up in my ward that I had no idea about. Footpaths being repaired in a certain part of the ward between October 22, April 23. I didn't know about that. Don't know about that. I mean, they might be starting as far as I know. So I think that joined up with the councillors is important because we can then directly liaise with residents without having to, go to different offices to ask the questions.
And I think it is something we'll take away, as we said earlier, about the sort of member notification on certainly on large scale. I would say there are literally, and I'm going to say there's tens of thousands.
It is
tens of thousands of noticed and will be permitted street works going on in the city every year. Tens of thousands. I'm going to say 120,000. I'm not sure. You can imagine sort of a commitment that we will inform you about every single one of those is not realistic.
No, but if he closes one that's closed a huge road yesterday, the November shut the entire day, which is a main arterial road in Redcap, Hartlepool Road was shut. I have no idea why. Just found out looking at this access to water. But that's such a big impact on the area. I was staggered that I never got told about that.
So just on water, I say I'll just perhaps refer to the answer we gave earlier on. We are having some issues with Severn Trent at the moment in terms of notifying us of works. So so
but a sign went up about 10 days ago.
Oh, okay.
So I was waiting for something to come through. It's going to drive past it every day.
Yeah.
And that's the kind of thing where it would be useful.
Yeah. We're again that early notification piece on major works. No, I think you're right, and I think that's something we'll take away. And this is something as I'd like to think with the street works team as we've got it now. We are, as Mo said, we've recruited to a much larger outfit now, which is just sort of forming together in gone through the recruitment over the last few months. I'd like to think that there will be scope within the capacity we've got there to perhaps give their effort members in terms of notification. As you say, major things that we were aware of, and then hopefully those things that we're not aware of will start reducing down, bearing in mind the controls we've then got through the permits and the inspections as well. On the stuff being left behind afterwards, just to be absolutely clear, the stop date, the end date includes removing everything from site. So if there's still stuff there left, as you say, bars, traffic management, that sort of, they can still be issued. If we find it, if we know, if we see it, if our inspectors go out and find it, we can then issue them with a with both, I think both a fixed body host and an overrun. So
You
again,
clearly can't inspect every site because there's too many, but you would use.
no, but we can inspect a lot more than
Yeah.
we do at the moment
Right.
because we will have more inspectors. And we'll have greater control over where they are and what times they will be there and what days they should be on and that sort of thing. So we will be able to put a greater regime around ensuring that when they're supposed to have left the site and cleared everything where they have. If not, we fix penalty notices and the overrun charge goes with that as well.
I think in some ways, and it's probably a stupid thing to say, but any overrunning in a ward, having the money coming back into the ward for other measures, because the ward have been inconvenienced, that's not so. And so you'll be, it'd be good to think that there's an opportunity somewhere to really think about the wards of suffered inconvenience of things being overrun, seeing some funds back into the ward again to improve some of the local.
We can take that away, but as you can imagine, there might be some difficulty.
Yes, I know.
Good.
Just one additional point, if I may, Chair. In terms of the final slide where we advertise, if you like, One Network, there was an additional email address on there, which is tmapprovals@birmingham.gov.uk. I express to anybody, if you have a specific query on an ongoing works that you don't know anything about that doesn't appear on One Network, or similarly, if there are barriers left over and the utility company disappeared last week and they're still there, take a quick photo, location, send it through to TM Approvals.
I'd encourage that absolutely, Jenny, and just one final point on that slide from me is, and I think we used a couple of examples on the final slide of the reasons why you might contact the TM Approvals box. I think the one that Mo's just mentioned there is actually the right thing to do. I think just to avoid any confusion, that will be again probably something we'll do because we do have a lot of new members this year, Chair, is we will again off the back of something around just, I suppose, the right way of contacting the right people on those issues, because we have had a few instances of not necessarily traffic lights stuck on red as the example said there, but other things. I mean, it mentioned something there, if you've seen something dangerous. Now, I think the message from us is that if you see something that is inherently and imminently dangerous, it's to ring the police. It's not to email the TMP inbox. Unfortunately, I've had it. Similarly, if you do see things as members or citizens that, and we did have this with one set of works where, because there seemed to be nothing going on the road, they took it into their own hands to remove the traffic management. That isn't acceptable either. If you do see anything like that you think is inherently dangerous, first port of call is the police if it's imminent. There is always the city council's contact number, and then as you say, out of hours, Chair, there is a 24-hour control centre at Lancaster Circus that will take any complaints about anything again that you think is imminently dangerous. So yeah, all I'll say is don't use the TMP approval box for something that is an immediate issue for you, because we're seeing emails as a members as a use of that, which isn't appropriate.
Okay, Mo and Kevin, thanks for this. And I think what the members are saying is they need communication, feedbacks, and they need to be aware of the work to will happen. We got planning notices, we got the licensing notices. And you're saying this lot of being run to colleges, while you can't keep calling of applications, but surely the major one where there's going to be major disruption for a number of days, then it's better for me if you're captain.
I think, Chair, there is that, and that's a commitment. So no, we'll take away and we'll work through with Luke in terms of how that can work a bit better with members. I think you touched on there the other part of this. There's a broader network management thing here, which looks at. We were talking at the start about what we call highway licenses, which are other things that impact on that aren't street works, so skips, scaffolding, boarding, that sort of thing. Those licenses, different set of legislation, different at the moment, a different team within highways, but we are looking again as part of the cabinet report that went last week to on the PFI project. We are looking at bringing that function back in house from Kia as well, from the PFI. Bring the team together with the BCC for the same reasons as we've given on this. And then at some point we will probably look about how that better integrates with the street works permits thing, because ultimately this is all about managing that space on the network. So I want to bring those back in together, a couple of steps in doing that over the next 6 to 9 months.
I mean, we remember many years ago when the several companies started giving payments and put snake lines on our payments. I mean,
Yeah.
remember that back in the 90s?
Probably, yeah.
So we don't want to get that comes to risk again.
Yeah.
Whoever they dig up our payment or road, that they
The
really say.
days of cable TV.
Yeah.
NTL.
Okay, thank you, Ron. Thanks. Now we move on to item 7 works for all. On you, Chris.
That's me. Afternoon, everyone. For those that don't know, I'm Christian Skane, Scrutiny Community Services. I've been provided with a useful briefing from the meeting, so I can't be here this afternoon. So if I get anything wrong, please shout. Bassim is here as well. But I think your work programme was set out as normal. Primarily, there's some updates to give you before we go into discussion around the meeting in December, or the activities you've got planned for this December. Looking ahead to February and April primarily. So I'll just run through those. So December, I understand that you're going to have a site visit for the December meeting, and that's not going to take place on the 14th of December with a start time of 1 o'clock. Basically, the aim of this afternoon is to make sure that that's still okay with all the committee, and we can sort of finalise arrangements for that. What I did want to do, this site visit has been arranged in consultation with Network Rail, and the aims and objectives of the visit will be to understand how the station has been improved in terms of capacity and the offer, both within the city and more widely at a regional level. And forgiveness for those that are watching on screens, the university station on that. The second point is how the refurbishment has improved links to other public transport and modes of travel, i.e. cycling, walking, offer, etc., to get to the station, and more importantly, as a key hub for those visiting the university and QE Hospital. And the third sort of aim and objective of the visit is how the contribution of the CAS funding to support the improvement work meets the council's ambition for a cleaner, greener city. And there's some further information that we can send around so everyone's clear about the aims and objectives of the visit before we can get there.
The call, I think, at one of our committee meetings, to the clean air zone, where there's the revenue we get from clean air zone, part of it would be spent on the, I think, not only the relevant through the relevant in the city centre, but part will be spent on the university station.
Yeah.
So that's why I think there's a request for us to see the use of clean air zone revenue to the connectivity and working life. Councillor Hudson.
Thank you very much. I believe it's normally protocol and convention that if a scrutiny committee goes to a particular ward councillors from that ward are invited as well and know that we are coming to them. So I would hope that's already been done, but if it hasn't, I would hope that would be done very quickly.
Can I just interject there? You'll note that your next meeting was scheduled for the 21st of December. What we're proposing is because it's so close to Christmas and the school holiday break, we're proposing that for order week. So members agree that, and then I can get to the local councils to let them know what date we're actually coming out. So the proposal is 14th of December. Members would agree that?
Yeah.
Or if there's a particular order.
I can't make that later.
Okay.
And not that it's a problem, just
Because,
definitely not around that date.
so I thought the December committee meeting would have been 22nd.
No, 20th.
The 20th December. So we'll bring it forward and have the visits in lieu of a meeting. So the December meeting in December, we have a side meeting to the university station for fact finding and for seeing ourselves where all the working is getting on.
That makes sense.
Yeah, from my perspective, with school holidays, yes, definitely, yeah, I think that's it, yeah.
So with that in mind, if that's agreed, we can now inform you.
Yeah.
But Brooke, I mean, you're okay with that?
So
I was just looking through the work programme to see what was proposed for this committee on December days. Sorry, got it in front of me.
It's currently empty.
Yeah. It was initially proposed at the last meeting, but we were going to get in touch with the West Midlands Rail Executive just to see if they could host a visit, because they're still doing work there.
So in effect, the site visit takes the place
Sure.
of the meeting in December.
Okay, good.
Thank you. The other quick update is just for April. Obviously, a bit of a way off yet, but we're sort of thinking in discussion with the chair of adding city and nature and road safety strategy to this meeting. That's on your sort of schedule to the scheduled list. We're just waiting for sort of subject to officer availability and stuff. But if the committee's happy with that, we can set that up and make sure that we've got good time to invite witnesses, etc. I guess the big one really is January is kind of set out on your work programme in the agenda papers. The big one really for discussion this afternoon is what do you want to do in February? And kind of sort of chatting this through. We think there's 4 options. There's nothing currently scheduled for February, and there's 4 options. I'll run them through them quickly and then provide a bit more detail. The first one is waste disposal contract. So potentially you're hearing from the cabinet member for environment in October, and potentially this may include victims information. So depending on what scope you wanted to look at, that's one option. Second option, we heard about it earlier, highways re-procurement. Again, that might be something you want to come back to in February. It could be a combination of both. You could look at both of those, depends how long you think you're going to need on both of those. And the fourth option is active travel. It's currently scheduled on your sort of to be considered list. I think previous discussions related to this topic committee is that there might be a need for an additional item in February for that. So I think we just need to be clear about some sort of aimed and objective for those sessions so we can go back to the officers and ensure that we can bring you the information that you require. So a bit of a sort of a waffle for me, but in short, the main discussion point, I'm sure Ms. Sultan Receiver is around February.
I just wanted to pick up Councillor Huxtable's point from earlier about the waste disposal contract procurement, that Councillor Mahmood talked about at the October meeting, and offered members a private briefing because it is commercially sensitive. So we've had discussions with Councillor Mahmood's office. There's some potential dates to do that in December, but it's assessed in a week before Christmas, so I don't know how members would be fixed in terms of being able to do that. It could be a Teams meeting to do that, or otherwise there's the ability to hold it in February because we've got a spare slot there at the moment.
Other members, please. February, okay? Another, Marvin, really the question of meeting the zero targets in the new. So
Yes, it would be Councillor Mahmood and Devon Share.
but that's the to do with the waste transportation contract.
Yeah, waste disposal.
Waste disposal. So is February okay with us? Fine.
Yeah, my preference would always just be outside.
Yeah.
Just one thing to start Christian's list there. I would say, provided everything goes to plan on BFI procurement, there will be nothing really additional to report in February. It will still be, the bids won't just, on time, the bids won't be coming in until April.
Fine.
So we'll still be in dialogue at that point. So unless things change, then there's probably going to be no real update what we give. But
Based on Christine's list, I would say I prefer to do something on active travel because we have discussed things in and around the previous months, in the few months since the election. To really touch on that. Obviously, as people around this might be, but I think also this is the efficiency beyond.
So it sounds like we've got waste disposal contracts for February, active travel. It sounds like Kevin saying probably April for coming back on.
yeah, it'll be an April cabinet report. We've got to take April or May cabinet report. We've got to take a business case to the EFT. So yeah, we come back in that period between receiving bids and going to cabinet.
Well, the one thing I would say, I think, to make the active travel one work, I think we've got a bit of time. We probably don't want to necessarily spend too much time on that this afternoon, but it'd be useful to come back maybe at the next meeting just with some clearer sort of aims and objectives. We can get active travel lined up, get the right people in place, but then if we can go, this is what you want to look at, this is your areas of interest, we can make sure that we bring you the right people with the right information.
Steve, do you want to help anything else?
Yeah, so just on the waste disposal contract, that would be a private briefing, so not be part of the main meeting.
Right.
And that's subject to obviously. Hopefully. We do that before. Yeah, we can work it based on utility and what the committee's doing, so it's possible to bring it forward. I'll work it out.
One of the options you get now, potentially a lot of this will be confidential or exempt rather, but there might be some stuff that you can do in public. So, for example, you could have active travel as a first item. You don't have sort of an open paper on the waste disposal contract, and then go into private session, which in effect would be the same thing. So we can need to speak to Darren and work out the best way of structuring that for you.
Thank you. Tim?
There were two pots of funding agreed last municipal year, and that was the highways lib, and also, and I think from the highways lib, memory serves correctly, there was about £661,000 on major schemes, and the balance of the funding was on minor schemes, so for example, like installation of street signs. And the second one, which was raised sessions ago, was the clean air zone fund for each ward in the city. And I would personally like to know what has happened in terms of progress regarding the highways loop schemes across the city and how we're doing, but also where we are with the criteria for the application of the clean air zone fund for each ward. And it seems to have gone quiet on some of those, and indeed there was an oral question relating to the highways made by Councillor Sacco-Chowdhury at the last City Council meeting. So it'd be very useful, I think, to have an update on both of those.
You've got a preferred time frame for that. I'm just looking at your work program in terms of what's already listed, and obviously you can put that in, but it wants to take away from time that you've already got on items.
So, would you be happy with any response from Phil, just by email, or would you?
All of them.
If we give a written
Is
update.
there flexibility, not just for you, sorry?
Yeah, no, obviously the entire committee, but I'm thinking the ability to actually question officers.
Well, potentially what we could do is we could do a written briefing, and then depending on what's in that written briefing, we could determine when it comes back to committee how urgent it is.
Yes,
Right.
and a lot of those schemes fit in very neatly with the active travel measures.
But that's going to come in at one of the committee meetings anyway.
Yes, exactly. That's my point. It would, if we did, following a written briefing, want to dig deeper into it, it would be neatly on the section that we have on active travel.
Yeah. Okay. Fine. Sounds good. Yeah. Anything else, Chris?
Not on my list.
Okay, thank you. Date and time of next meeting is 14th December in Sarton Village.
Yeah. It's happy to start or to go to the station at 1 p.m. It's going to last about an hour and a half. 1 o'clock, okay?
And then
The date is, I think, Basima was telling us to do
I'll send you.
the information, what we're going to meet, and okay,
Yeah.
like, thank you very much. Right. Request for polling? None? Any particular? None? Any other business? None? Thought for the game is there and the office is there? Thank you. That concludes our meeting. Thanks for attending.
Next one. Speech. Always.